Welcome, and thanks to everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm Lena Eberhardt, CEO of Let's Get Ready. I know we have folks in the audience with varying degrees of familiarity with Let's Get Ready, so I just wanted to take a moment to give an overview of our work and the students we serve. We support students from 11th grade to college graduation through all stages in the college journey, from SAT prep to the admissions and decisions process to navigating the campus environment once they arrive in college. Our goal is to ensure all students, no matter their background, can reach their college aspirations. Our program relies on near-peer mentors, college students, most of whom are alumni of the program, who are trained to act as college coaches and who supplement our curriculum and resources with their own real-life experience. Our program is fully virtual and works with students all across the country, but mostly in the Northeast from Maine to Pennsylvania. Last year, we worked with over 13,000 students and are growing every year. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today. Queen Sara Krong is an educator and college and career access advocate for underrepresented students.
Thank you so much, Lena, and thank you all so much for tuning in. We have a dynamic panel of LGR students, coaches, and staff joining us this afternoon. We're excited to get their firsthand perspective about the challenges and opportunities in higher education created by the pandemic, and how Let's Get Ready was able to pivot and respond to best serve students during this incredibly challenging year. So I'd like to get started by introducing our panelists. First up, we have Grace B. Ciardi. I apologize. Grace is the Managing Director of Program Design at Let's Get Ready and works with the program teams to shape LGR's programming to ensure that LGR's model is innovative, aligned to core values, and that it is responsive to the changing higher ed landscape and the needs of LGR students and partners. She also ensures that our near-peer coaches and program teams have the curriculum, resources, and training that they need to deliver the program to the highest impact possible. So thank you so much for joining us, Grace. Up next, we have Fatoumata Conte. Fatu is graduating from Princeton this spring, earning her degree in operations research and financial engineering. After graduation, she will start as an asset manager at UBS. Fatu is an LGR student and then served as a coach in the Access program. So welcome, Fatu. Up next, we have Dean Trusty. Dean, you probably saw him in the video, is graduating from Farmingdale State College with a degree in industrial technology and automotive management. He started with LGR as a student and then went on to serve as a math coach and site director in the Access program, and currently serves as a success coach. So welcome, Dean. Next, we have Madeira Thayer. Madeira is graduating from Tufts University, where she majored in economics and minored in Spanish and Latin. After graduation, she will be a college advisor with the College Advising Corps, and she will pursue her master's degree in educational policy studies at Boston University. Madeira is also a coach with the LGR's transition program, and she previously served as a coach and site director in the Access program. And last but not least, we have Cleanie Murphy. Cleanie is graduating from Lafayette College, where he majored in psychology and environmental studies. After graduation, he is headed to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore to study for his master's degree in education. He also serves as a coach in LGR's transition program. So thank you all so much for being with us today. So let's get started in this panel. Obviously, this past year has had many challenges, and seemingly everyone in education has been impacted in some way, right? And I would love to focus today's conversation about the past school year and how you all have navigated or are continuing to navigate during this time. So up first, we have Fatu. I want you to talk a little bit about the past few months and how that has been like as a student. So how has it been kind of navigating since March for you as a student?
I think we can all agree that it's been definitely a weird experience, but also while there has been some negatives, I've been trying to find the positives in the situation. I think one of the key takeaways from this whole experience is like having the time to reflect and spend time with family. I think a lot of people found themselves in like their childhood homes and rooms and had to like, just reflect on where they were and how crazy this whole transition has been. So just keeping my mind on the positive has helped me a lot in terms of like coming to terms with the fact that I'm a senior and I won't be able to, I didn't have the opportunity to sort of experience those senior events that usually happen towards the end of the year. But just trying to continuously connect with people and not stay so isolated has been a key turning point for me in terms of making the negative into a positive.
Yeah, that's so important because, as you know, this past year, it really was focused on keeping that positive because there were so many things that were negative, and it was very important to understand those silver linings. So can you talk a little bit more about how your coaches were able to kind of like support you in the virtual environment? Talk a little bit about the virtual environment, how your coaches were helpful, and also what were the opportunities that you had being in a virtual environment.
Yeah,
And this is for you.
Yeah, so the main form of communication that the coaches offered was virtual text, and just continuously checking on me, which was definitely helpful. And just knowing that I had that continued support, not just this year, but generally speaking in my college career has been very useful for me. I didn't utilize it as much as I did in the start of my college career, but this year really encouraged me to engage in the text messages and the online communication, and it definitely helped.
Absolutely. We love coaches and hearing how supportive that they've been to the students throughout this time. So for Cleany, Madeira, Dean, obviously you guys are working with high school students and college students through the transition and the success program. And as we were saying, I can only imagine how it is dealing with it for you personally, but then also dealing with students as well. So tell us a little bit about that experience. So we're going to start with you, Clenny, and then move to Madeira, and then lastly, Dean. So for you, Clenny, how has that been dealing with you and also dealing with the students you're working with?
Yes, thank you. I really actually think the students kind of helped me through it because like they kind of like gave me that energy, that excitement, that like push to keep going forward. And I think like it was more of us helping each other and less of me maybe just helping them or like just telling them stuff to do. I think like kind of navigating it and navigating it for myself and giving them things that I've done to get through the pandemic and getting through school just this last semester has helped them, but also things that they've said to me, like things they've done or things that they've worked on throughout the pandemic has really like helped build a relationship between us two. And I think that like it was hard for everybody, but just having that communication, having somebody to rely on, and that gonna be able to talk to whenever you need to is really been something I've enjoyed throughout the pandemic is talking to the students.
Yeah, because everybody was like right isolated in their homes, and I'm sure that human connection was very helpful.
Yes.
So I'm glad that you brought that up. So up next, Madeira, how was that like for you?
Yeah, I completely agree with Clenny about how what my students are going through is very similar to what I'm going through as a student in the pandemic. I've noticed in a lot of my conversations that motivation is one of the hardest parts of going to school during the pandemic, is just finding that motivation. And sometimes in my conversations, I have tips that may be able to help the students that I'm working with. And a lot of times they'll have tips that will actually help me too. But it's kind of about having that dialogue and really being able to reflect on what works and what doesn't work, and being able to practice a little bit of self-forgiveness with that as well, and kind of being able to remind yourself that we're not able to function normally in these abnormal times.
That's such a good point. I love the self-forgiveness piece. And I call it self-grace. It's like, we're not going to get everything done on our to-do list today. And that's okay because we are in a world pandemic. So give yourself self-forgiveness. So that's such a great point. So up next, Dean, how was it like for you?
I would say like, it was eye opening because, when the pandemic first started, the students was just telling me like the experiences they had and made me like realize like, I'm not going through it alone. And I was able to share the experience with my students as well. Like, hey, like we're not alone in the situation. As long as we work together and like stay motivated, definitely we could easily come out successful. Even though like a lot of things have changed in terms of the social aspect of social distancing or online learning. But as long as we push through and stuff, that's pretty much the key.
That is so important. I love that everyone was having the same experience. And I think that it just made it a little easier to navigate. So I want to talk a little bit about what were the challenges that the students were facing, right? Like you're working with the students, you're also going to college, but what were some of the specific things that students were facing that you would like students to, for the folks on this to know about? So we can start off with you, Dean. What were those specific challenges that the students you were working with were facing?
The challenges some of the students face is that they, it was hard for them to transition to online learning, virtual learning with pretty much, like for instance, I'm in my room right now. So like some students was just like, it's pretty loud in my room. Like it's hard to find like a study space. Like it's hard for them to find focus in their room. Pretty much like I gave them the tip, like, maybe, it's best to go to your local coffee shop, use the Wi-Fi there, like, because that was another thing, like some students did not have Wi-Fi access. So that was like some challenges that the students face.
And how about you, Madeira?
Yeah, I think again, motivation was a really big one. Just finding that motivation to do everything that you need to do in just for school. I think another big challenge was that not being in person in school takes a lot more self-advocacy. So if you need a letter of recommendation from a teacher and you're not sure if they have written it yet, you aren't just going to see them in the hall and be able to ask them then. You have to really step up and take that initiative to email them and to reach out, and sometimes to be sending multiple emails because teachers' inboxes, of course, are very, very full in this time. So that I think was another really big challenge too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of teachers as well were dealing with this whole pandemic, and I'm sure students felt like they had to stand up for themselves and advocate. So that's a really great point. And how about you, Clenny? Where were some of the students that you were working with? What were those specific things?
Yes. I like what you said about the informal conversations. I feel like a lot of students like talked about like missing out on that and just being able to talk to teachers just in general, just not something so formal, but also a lot of my students that I talked to had more responsibilities that they had to, maybe it was a sibling that was home or a grandparent, or they had to pick up a job during the pandemic. But a lot of the students weren't just like, the school wasn't the main priority. It was other responsibilities that they had that I think kind of made them have to push through certain things and work through a lot of obstacles.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of students in my lives had to get like part-time jobs, and just being able to navigate going to school and also like working. That's such a good point that you brought up. So I'm going to pivot over to Grace, right? Like Let's Get Ready has been in existence for about 20 years, but nothing can prepare you for a global, worldwide pandemic. So walk us through the past year. How has LGR supported students since last March? And talk a little bit about that journey from last March to where we are currently with LGR.
Sure. So when the pandemic first hit, so little was known about the lives of college applicants and college students and how they would be impacted, right? So it was an incredibly overwhelming moment. And we, like many schools and organizations, were trying to figure out how to best support students. I think what emerged really quickly and what was really beautiful to watch in the very early months of the pandemic was the way our college student mentors, like these amazing people on the phone with us today, and their students who'd been, working together and building relationships for several months before the lockdowns, how they all leaned into those relationships in those like really uncertain first few months. So I think those relationships formed the sort of beginning of Let's Get Ready's response as coaches were themselves uprooted and trying to figure out, their campuses were closing and they're on the phone with their students, trying to give them tips for how to adjust to virtual learning. I think we relied on the coaches' incredible energy and these relationships that they developed with their students in those early months. As a staff team, then it was our role to figure out how to wrap around that incredible work that the coaches were naturally doing, their experiences that they were leveraging. So the staff team then sort of worked furiously in the background to kind of leverage the insights that we were hearing from across the community and from partners to make sure that coaches had access to like the most up-to-date information, as admissions deadlines were changing, as the College Board was changing SAT dates, as college policies were changing. There's a lot of information that coaches had to stay up to date on. And so the team sort of had to work quickly to make sure that coaches had access to those resources. And I think the other piece that really jumps out at me as around our ability to respond to this moment, because we have access to 13,000 students, over 13,000 students and these incredible coaches, we had immediate early insights into the challenges that students were facing, the questions that they had, the worries, the concerns. And so it provided this channel for us to be able to hear exactly, while other folks were having to sort of wait for headlines to hear about what students were experiencing and what they needed, we had that information coming to us all the time. So one example of that that allowed us to pivot, was around mental health. So our coaches were sharing with us very early that they were seeing signs of stress and fear and worry and isolation, in the stories that students were sharing with their coaches, and that all of our students, many of whom are disproportionately impacted by the health and financial impacts of the pandemic, that they needed more support. So as a result of that, thanks to a generous grant, Let's Get Ready was able to connect students to free online therapy with registered counselors. So that's an example of the kind of pivot that we wouldn't have been able to make without that sort of open channel to students and coaches. Most of our programs were already virtual before the pandemic. And so that was a really lucky thing for us that we weren't sort of scrambling alongside some other schools and organizations. But we did have some in-person programming that we had to transition into an online space, which was our SAT prep portion of our program. So we had to use a lot of that creativity and resilience to try to pivot that program in a strong way.
Absolutely. And just hearing all the pivots that you had to make, if no one has said thank you, this is thank you on behalf of everyone, because that is no small feat. And I know a lot of different organizations where had to scramble at the last minute to figure things out. And as you can tell from the students, they had a great time working with the students, but also a lot of students were impacted by the work that Let's Get Ready was doing. So a huge thank you. Thank you for being so student-centered since March. But you brought up a really good point in how people can support, right, in this great initiative and this great work that Let's Get Ready is doing. So how can donors, the general public, and anyone who's interested support college students and organizations like Let's Get Ready? So talk a little bit about how people can get involved.
Sure. So I think the first thing people can do is exactly what folks on this call are doing right now. So if you're interested in equity and inequality and understanding those issues better in higher education, which we obviously at Let's Get Ready think everybody should be, attending events like this, hearing directly from students like the ones that we're hearing from today, talking to students in your own lives and reading just to understand really what are the challenges, what are the unique challenges, what are the needs. If you're in a position to do so, to make a financial contribution to an organization like Let's Get Ready, that's working to try to level the playing field and to support underrepresented students in particular. And I guess the last thing I'd say is to stick with it. So the pandemic has raised the temperature and the awareness, but the issues that our students face and the barriers that they face, they are not new. And when this pandemic, when we're all back at the target, like happily, doing our thing, it doesn't mean that these issues are not still, that issues of inequality and barriers to access to college won't still exist. And so sticking with the work and staying connected and continuing to support organizations like Let's Get Ready moving forward, even when the pandemic is over, I think it's important.
Absolutely. That is such a good point, because I think so many folks are in the mindset that once, masks are off, we're back, things are back to normal, but realize this is not a moment, this is a movement, and we need to be active participants in breaking down systemic inequity. So great
Exactly.
point. So for all the students on the call, I have one last question for all of you, because as we said, things are kind of quote unquote going back to normal. But before we turn to some audience questions, I'm going to say, let's say we live in a perfect world, right? And we have a magic wand from a fairy, and we can solve one problem that students may face next year if they are required to be back on campus. So for the students on the call, if you were required to be back on campus next year and you had a magic wand, what is the one problem you will solve and why? So I'm going to start off with you, Fatu, first, and then we can move to Dean, Clenny, and then Madeira. How about that? So Fatu, magic wand, the world is yours. What would you solve? One problem.
Yeah, so I would go back and reflect on something that Grace brought up earlier, which is just this whole idea of mental health. I think like this whole experience highlighted like the struggle between balancing work and play, because a lot of students literally like where they worked was where they also rested. And it was difficult to separate, academics from taking time to yourself. And a lot of students struggled with just like being able to find time for themselves and, center themselves. So I think one thing that I would, fix in a magical world would be getting students to realize that they do have the power to make time for themselves. And it's just as important as like getting an essay or an assignment in.
That's such a good point. So self-care, mental health services, great. So your wish, it's done. So the magic wand, we got it. All right, so up next we have Dean. What problem would you solve?
I would say definitely to increase confidence. The reason being is because, when we go back in person, like I know like students tend to feel nervous in terms of like speaking to the professor, introducing to the professor, or talking to the fellow classmates, special connection. Definitely going back, I'm just saying to myself, like I want to talk to people or, more professors, because there's a lot of things going on. Therefore, like with the pandemic, I really want to have it where I'll be able to reach out to more people as well.
I love that, increasing confidence. So up next, Clenny, what would yours be?
I'm gonna kind of go off of Dean. Mine was networking and like building your network at school, and really looking forward to like networking with everybody, and not just networking with just like the professors or somebody you think where you might work, working with your peers, the other young professionals that are going to be doing successful things as well, and just kind of making sure that you're going to school, not just on the schoolwork, like of course do well, but like make sure that you're meeting somebody, make sure that you're learning new things, make sure that you're understanding the world as a whole, like not just there for yourself. So that's what I would say. Just build your network, because your network's kind of your net worth.
Yes. I love that you said that. I heard something yesterday that said exposure leads to expansion. And that's just exactly what you just brought up, is like when you network and you meet different people, you are exposed to a whole new world. And life is about relationships. So I really love what you said about that. And last but not least, Madeira, like what is your magic wand?
Yeah, so I've noticed that in my own classes this semester, a lot of professors have had a heightened sense of like flexibility and understanding for what we're all going through. But I think it's really important that that is maintained after the pandemic too, because of course, a lot of there are a lot of extra challenges because of the pandemic, but you are never just going to school. There's always a lot of stuff going on in your life outside of that. So I guess my wish would be that professors and administrators as well, just like all of the staff and faculty at universities, maintain that that flexibility and that understanding.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing, I was writing notes to make sure that if I ever see this ferry, that, I can bring your request and that will all be solved. So I heard mental health, definitely having mental increasing confidence in students. That's very important. Networking and helping students realize relationships and being exposed to different things. And then flexibility, right? I've seen a lot of professors get called out on like TikTok and Facebook for not allowing students to have flexibility in turning in work. And you're saying like we need that flexibility moving forward. So those are really, really great things. And I hope the folks on these calls are taking notes and what students will need once things are back to normal, back on campus. So I'm going to turn it over to questions from our audience because we know folks have been on here and would like to learn more from the panelists that we have. So the first question, and I will give this to you, Madeira, is what's the most useful resource LGR has provided to you this year? So actually, I'm going to do Madeira and Fatu to answer this. So we'll start with Madeira. What's the most useful resource provided to you this year?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We have a whole ton of resources in our coach resource libraries. I think the navigating the pandemic resource has been really, really helpful, and kind of acknowledging all of those like social and emotional challenges and the importance of social and emotional learning. So I have read a bunch of those resources and I'll bring them up in conversations, or I'll send out emails just to acknowledge kind of what's going on, and I'll attach a couple articles either that I found on my own or that I got from the resource library, just to say like, hey, if you want to read more about this, if you want to, watch a short meditation video or whatever it is. Like those resources have been definitely very, very helpful. So hard to choose one in particular, but that little family of resources.
I love that. And how about you, Fatu?
Yeah, my top choice definitely has to be the BetterHelp therapy sessions. It's one students like, you should think about going to therapy and talking to someone about, what issue you might be experiencing. But it's another thing to actually be able to offer that to students, because like therapy is very expensive. And so just having that free resource is like very pivotal. And I was very excited to see that Let's Get Ready was offering that. So yeah, definitely those therapy sessions.
That's amazing. And I'm glad that you use that resource as well, because I know that your thing was mental health. So that's such a great tie-in. And so for Clenny and Dean, what was the most challenging part of trying to build a relationship with students in a virtual environment? Can you talk a little bit about that? So we can start off with Clenny. What was challenging about building those relationships? And then we'll move to you, Dean.
Honestly, I would say the two things were definitely getting the students to like, I wouldn't say they didn't trust me, but really knowing that I'm there for them and really showing them that I'm going to be like here for you, for your support, and provide you whatever you need. And also just the virtual space. Like they've been on class all day for 5-6 hours. Then they got to look at the screen to do their homework. And then somebody's calling them or texting them, looking at the screen. Like it was kind of trying to find that threshold of not doing too much, but not doing too little, and making sure that like they're still comfortable, but I'm still providing them the help that they need. So really that virtual space, kind of just finding that threshold was probably the most difficult thing for me.
Absolutely. How about you, Dean?
Definitely, I would say like the time commitment. The reason being is because a lot of students, they had responsibilities at home, like taking care of little brothers, little siblings, or having outside jobs. So like, usually when it comes to my students, I'm like, hey, like, I'm available in the evening as well, or, I can open up my weekend to speak to you guys. So definitely I would say, it's just the time commitment and just like finding that flexibility in the schedule to, be able to speak to them.
Makes sense. And Grace, I'm curious for you as program staff, like what was challenging managing the coaches in the field and also just like staff overall as well? Can you talk a little bit about that, Grace?
Yeah, I think it was an incredibly overwhelming time for staff as well, in part because they are managing college students, and college students were going through this experience at the same time. So, I think one of the things we really pride ourselves, and one of the ways that we're able to deliver a really high quality and consistent program that has high impact in a virtual environment, is by really high rigor supervision. And at the same time, program managers, our staff, were having to really be understanding. Madiara, to your point before, sort of, this idea that we have to be able to flex as people need things, and our staff were stressed and our college students were stressed. And so I think figuring out that balance between support, but also like high expectations, and like, we want to support you. We understand you're going through something hard, and you have such an important role to do with your students. So navigating that and balancing that, I think, was a real challenge for our staff in supporting and holding accountable our near peer mentors.
Absolutely. And so we've talked a little bit about the issues, but like, I wonder what the silver linings were, right? What were the silver linings that you didn't expect in the pandemic? And so I'm going to actually ask all the students, and maybe even you, Grace, talk about those silver linings you didn't expect, because it's been a really tough year, but sometimes you got to focus on the good stuff that happened as well. What were the silver linings that happened this year? So let's start with you, Madeira, and then we'll pivot to Quenny, Fatu, Dean, and then Grace. So Madeira, silver linings of this year.
Yeah, I think there are a whole bunch if you look for them on a more macro level. Just in looking at inequity in the college process in general, I think schools going test optional, and schools really increasing their online accessibility is huge. And I think a lot of schools are going to kind of continue that after the pandemic. So that's very, very exciting. And then as a coach, being able to experiment more with those ways to virtually connect with students, which some students feel more comfortable with. That has been it's been a learning experience, and I think something that will be very, very helpful in the future as well.
Great. Quenny?
I would say the silver lining would be definitely it made you more creative. The pandemic kind of like made you kind of think outside of the box for the things that you had to do, or things that you kind of had to create, or just making something new because you're just kind of in the same space all the time. So definitely, I would say it was a bunch of creative bursts throughout the pandemic. And another silver lining would really be, to me, like being able to just sit there and kind of reflect with yourself, kind of what Fatima was saying earlier, just being able to really look back and sit down and take a second to just chill, I think was probably another silver lining for me in the pandemic.
Got it. How about you, Fatu?
Yeah, so I've actually found myself like learning more about my classmates and friends that I hadn't really like talked about before. One of the things that people would bring up in Zoom meetings is like people's background. So like if there was like a cool picture in background, or it's like that would spark a story about the person, and just really allow you to get to know them on a deeper level. So just making those personal connections and realizing the importance of those was definitely, I guess, a silver lining for me.
How about you, Dean?
I would say, like, for me, definitely it'd be everyone was be pretty much adaptable. The reason being is because, like, for my friends, like, we definitely do Google Meets every weekend. But then also professors have office hours virtually. But then I noticed with some campuses, they would still hold events, but like the virtual setting, or like a social distance setting as well. Pretty much was like, it helped like highlight the campuses who are aware that, there's a lot of issues that are going on, but that bring light to the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely. How about you, Grace?
I would say that as an organization, one of the exciting sort of doors that virtual like that this moment has opened up, is our ability to serve students in a wider geographic area. So as programs become fully virtual, it means that students who wouldn't normally be able to travel to attend one of our programs, students in rural communities, for example, haven't historically been able to access our programs, and now they can. And so it sort of feels like new opportunities for us as an organization to serve students who are in educational deserts, who've been left out. And so in some ways that feels like a silver lining.
Yeah, I love the term educational deserts. This is my first time hearing it, but I'm definitely going to be using it more in the future. So for the students, let's pivot a little bit. So we've talked about Let's Get Ready, but on your own campuses, right, for the students and the coaches, what were some of the things that happened on campus, those improvements that happened on campus, that you hope continues in the future? So we can probably start off with you, Fatu. What were the things that were happening on your campus that changed during the pandemic that you hope stays for the future as well? So Fatu, how about that? You can start there.
Yeah, housing insecurity was a major issue on my campus. Because a lot of students were sent home last minute, a lot of people didn't have an option to go home, and so they found themselves sort of trapped in this position of where do I go? And one thing that the university offered was more funding for low-income students to either live off campus or live on campus. And what I found is that the university has been pushing more opportunities for funding, not just for housing and stuff, but also food insecurity and just things that students might need during the summertime when they're off campus. And so just the university's attention to home life and being more considerate, sort of like Madeira was talking about, but from another perspective, has been a very amazing change to see in the university. And I hope that continues to grow.
How about you, Dean?
I would say host more events, because with my school, I will admit, on the weekends, my school is pretty boring. However, there's more events that do occasionally happen on the weekend now. Just recently, they had a concert where everyone had to stay in their cars, and everything, but that was pretty enjoyable. So I definitely hope that they continue by pushing more events and be able to find a way to provide more entertainment on campus.
Oh, I love that. It made me think about drive-in theaters. I know they're a throwback, old school, but that could come back in this pandemic. So I really love that you brought that up.
And that's the thing,
And
they recently brought that back on campus.
They did. Okay. So I thought it was really a genius thinking about it, but whole time it's already been done. Good to know. So how about you, Clenny and Madeira?
I would say the professors became way more lenient. I remember I had one professor before the pandemic, and then after when the pandemic started, it's a whole different person. And I was I was kind of wondering, are they going to be the same after we go back to school? We're in person, but I really hope that the professors continue to be a little bit more adaptable and not don't do your work, but kind of just more lenient to what the students' needs are. Because just they have responsibilities and things to do, the students to do as well. So I really hope that the professors become a little bit more adaptable or stay as adaptable as they are.
That makes a lot of sense. Anyone else? All right. So okay, Madeira, go ahead.
Yeah, just to echo kind of what Dean was saying, I think one of the biggest changes that I've really enjoyed at Tufts is the online accessibility for different events and different speakers, not just at Tufts, but also at a bunch of other schools. I get emails all the time about different events that are going on. One of my favorites that I attended this year, I realized I have the book right next to me, but The Privileged Poor by Anthony Abraham Jack is an amazing book that I read this year, and I was able to go to an event that he was speaking at MIT that was virtual, and that I probably wouldn't have been able to go to otherwise because it was right before one of my classes. So that online accessibility has been really, really great, and I've been really trying to take advantage of that.
What is it called? The Privileged Poor? I want to make sure I put it on my book list.
Yeah, it's called The Privileged Poor.
Got it. And how about you, Grace? There's a specific question that asks, As Let's Get Ready starts to plan for the upcoming school year, what is the team thinking about as you aim to best serve students in an ongoing, very unpredictable world? And also, higher ed is a little bit of a hot mess right now. So, how are you able to plan and to keep things on track for next year?
Well, I think one of the things that we've learned, all of us probably, is that like we really can't plan for the future with any certainty in ways that we might have assumed that we could in the past. So I think in some ways what's great is we know now that things are going to change. We don't know what to expect. Higher ed is going this way and that way and this way, right? And students' needs kind of continue to be what they are. So I think one thing is trying not to lock in to particular things. Like we need the College Board to do this with the SAT and then we'll be okay. How do we stay nimble? How do we stay flexible as an organization? And how do we improve what we're doing? So one example of something that we really had to pivot around this year is how do we make 100% sure that our coaches know how to listen for students who are at higher risk, who are experiencing particular challenges, and then know what to do about that, escalate that up to a staff member. How do we make sure that we're listening for and hearing when students need more? And that's an example of something that, you know, we worked really hard to do this year to make sure that we were identifying the students that needed more. But I think looking ahead to the next year, like that's something that we can do even better at, to continue to make sure that we know what students in our student body need more support, need targeted intervention. And so things like that, like we can focus on the things that we know we can improve to improve student outcomes. Try to be strategic, try to listen to what's happening in higher ed, but also to sort of focus on what we know matters and what we know makes a difference.
Yeah, so focusing on what you can actually control, right? Because so many things are very uncontrollable right now.
That's right.
Such a good tip. And so the last question we have are, and I will pose this to all the students, any closing thoughts for any audience members that have college students in their lives? How can they support them and also encourage them throughout the summer and the upcoming school year? And I know most of you guys are seniors, so you're like, I don't care about college. But, you know, what advice can you give? Because, you know, there might be folks in the audience who have college students in their lives. What advice would you give for supporting them for the upcoming summer and school year? So we can start with you, Madeira.
Yeah, I'd say be open. Well, beyond just being open to feedback, make sure there's space for that. Make sure that you create a space to listen to students and what they need and what challenges they're going through and how you can be helpful in that, because you don't know what you don't know. And each student is going to have our own challenges that we're going through. So making sure that you create a space specifically for that, whether that's like I actually taught a class at Tufts this semester, and I had an online feedback form that people could fill out throughout the semester. And last semester I had a professor who did the same thing, and that was very, very helpful. But whatever that looks like, creating a space to listen to students, I think is really important.
How about you, Fatu?
I would say be willing to have like conversations that you maybe wouldn't have had previously, and like offer them a book that might expand their perspective, because I think a lot has happened this year politically and socially, and it's really encouraged dialogue. And I think it's important to continue that trend and just, you know, expand people's perspectives and have conversations. So definitely talk to the students around you and try to expand their minds and perspectives.
Clenny?
My thing would be definitely to always ask questions. Like my friends call me a reporter because I'm always asking questions. But like, if you're not 100% sure, I feel like just always ask the question and just to make sure you get that 100% security.
Great. Last but not least, Dean?
I would say definitely, you know, when it comes to college students, definitely have that open mind. And as Clinton said, don't be afraid to ask questions, because you don't want to make random assumptions to make you look kind of weird or look like a fool. But definitely, you know, have that deep conversation and get to know the person, but then also, be able to have sympathy for other students when it comes to certain things that come up.
That is so important. I love that, asking questions, making sure that you're giving articles that expand the mind. Being a little reporter. I love I love that. I'm going to use that. So I just want to say thank you guys. You guys have been an awesome panel, and I think it really gives us insight into what students will need, what students have already experienced, the past, the present, and then the hopes for the future as well. So for Grace, thank you for being an amazing staff member for Let's Get Ready and getting the students that whatever they needed to be successful. And for the panelists and the students on the call, I wish you all the best. I know you're just seniors. The whole world is ahead of you. And I wish you all the best as you get into your summer and also as you get into the next chapter of your lives. So I'm going to pass it over to Lena. Thank you all for being an amazing panel. So back to you, Lena.
Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. And a special thank you to Queen Star for leading this amazing conversation, and to Grace for your leadership and vision at Let's Get Ready always. And particular thanks to Dean, Fatu, Clenny, and Madeira. I personally learned so much from your insights today. And I'm just so impressed and moved by your work this year, your work with Let's Get Ready. And congratulations for getting through this incredibly intense time. We hope you were all inspired by what you learned today. If you're interested in making a donation to support our work, please click the link below. And you can also learn more there about the rest of our graduation week. We hope you can join us for our graduation celebration on Thursday at 5:30 p.m. And in addition, there's just lots and lots of really exciting, important work happening at Let's Get Ready. If you're interested in learning more about the organization, our programs, our commitment to equity, our interest in providing holistic supports for our students, our efforts to be innovative and really responsive in this new environment, just our sort of strategic growth plan in general, please respond to any of the emails you've received from us or reach out directly and we'll follow up right away. Again, thanks so much for joining us and have a wonderful afternoon.